Um, uh, I would like to preface this video by saying that the Atheist Experience does not necessarily share my views, and that I don't necessarily share the views of the Atheist Experience. Having made that unambiguous, I'd like to address your first criticism of the Atheist Experience clip. You argue that the hosts of the show should have provided and critiqued a list of supposed sources that some Christians may or may not use as evidence for the historicity of Jesus, but doing that is neither necessary or pertinent. It makes way more sense to have the believer of a claim provide the evidence, which convinced them of the veracity of their argument, instead of having the skeptic blindly guessing countless rebuttals, which may be completely irrelevant to the believer. You next refer us to your links, which leads us to a video I've grown accustomed to seeing whenever I get into this discussion with Christians about the historicity of Jesus. All the historians listed in this video who are supposed to confirm the historicity of Jesus never even met him, but only speak briefly of what people believed about him after he allegedly died, like Josephus or Celsus. Celsus, by the way, lived in the 2nd century, so when he talked about Jesus doing witchcraft, I don't know how he can make that judgment any more than you can make the judgment that Jesus was divine. This also ties into later in the video when you ask, why would secular historians write about Jesus' miracles? I find that to be a peculiar question, since your links talk about secular historians who talk about Jesus' miracles. If they were willing to document Christian beliefs, why not document miracles as they were happening? Your next criticism of the video was, these Roman records of Jesus do not exist anymore. They were lost. I don't know why you didn't know that, unless you didn't know anything about history. Let's talk about history. Oh boy. When Christianity became the official religion of Rome, there was a systematic censorship of ideas in history. The early followers of Christ burnt down libraries like Antioch and closed down schools like the Academy of Plato. If there was an arrest record of Jesus, it would have been kept and preserved by the church as de facto proof of Jesus, like St. Peter's Basilica. It probably would have had its own grotesque shrine too. You next ask, why would the church put an uninspired brief mention of Jesus in the Bible? Yes, this referring to an arrest record of Jesus. They would do that if they wanted to address the questions of whether or not Jesus lived, to differentiate him from the sons of other alleged gods as an actual living person. It's the same reason why they have the Shroud of Turin. In your next statement, you say, if they did put it in the Bible, it would automatically be wrong. You say that with sarcasm in reference to if there was a historical document of Jesus' arrest record. But it wouldn't be wrong if it was a copy of an actual preserved document about Jesus' arrest, contemporary to the time of Jesus. It'd actually be a pretty good indication that Jesus was a living person. You've completely misunderstood why it is wrong to use the Bible to argue for the historicity of Jesus. It is not wrong because the Bible is automatically wrong, but it is wrong and illogical to use any claim as justification of its own validity without the support of outside evidence, because doing so already presupposes the validity of the claim. It's a circular argument. Then you say, whatever goes into the Bible is immediately unreliable, according to you, referring to the host of the Atheist Experience. I don't think Don Baker or Jeff D has ever said whatever is in the Bible is immediately unreliable. And then you erroneously say, even if we did have these records, you still wouldn't accept it. That is nonsense. I would have no problem accepting that Jesus existed so long as there was sufficient evidence to think so. That's not the issue. The real issue is whether or not the miraculous nature attributed to Jesus is an actual portrayal of the person. Saying that skeptics wouldn't accept the evidence, even if you hadn't, isn't true and doesn't excuse you for the lack of evidence that you have about the historicity of Jesus. Now, you wouldn't get very far if you went to school and said, you wouldn't accept my homework even if I had it. So, don't use it in illogical arguments. The Atheist Experience brought up the Gospels of Judas, to which you contended, the Gospel of Judas was written by a fringe Gnostic sect, certainly not Judas, at least 100 years afterwards. You cannot substantiate that claim any more than you can substantiate the claim that the Gospels were written by the disciples. Let's be honest here. I have no good reason to believe that any of this is actually true. But even if I were to assume that the Gospels were actual eyewitness accounts, it would still only be second-hand, unverifiable stories about miracles. which cannot be distinguished from the heretical views about Jesus or other Messiah figures such as Hercules or Apollonius of Tyana, which you later referred to. The next point of contention arose when you declared people did write about it, the miracles of Jesus, actually, probably less than 30 years later. Let's assume you're right. The first works about Jesus were the letters by Paul, who actually never met Jesus, and who didn't refer to him as a living person. So the disciples waited around 3 decades to write about the most important occurrence in all of human history, which they experienced, but only after Paul wrote his letters. Isn't it strange that Paul took less time to write his letters? How do you know that the biblical Gospels were not written the same way as the non-biblical Gospels? Your only argument to support the claim that the non-biblical Gospels were not divinely inspired, like the biblical Gospels, is by saying they sucked. They contained heretical viewpoints. Those viewpoints are only heretical now, I would like to say, because they didn't agree with the First Council of Nicaea, and that has nothing to do with the truth value of the claims. We reach a pivotal point around 9 minutes into the video, where you seem overwhelmed by emotions as you try to explain again why skeptics wouldn't accept the evidence even if we had it. You begin displaying a deep misunderstanding of how rational skeptics view historical claims, especially when you bring up Alexander the Great. When you say, Alexander the Great never existed. You aren't using the same standards to deny the existence of Alexander the Great that skeptics use to deny the existence of Jesus. But even if I ignore that fact, so what? If Alexander the Great never existed, that would have absolutely no consequence on our current lives, unlike Jesus. However, if the story of Jesus are actually true, then it would have a profound impact on almost all the aspects of all lives, all places, and all times. Saying that some guy lived and conquered some land isn't the same as saying some guy lived and was the Son of God. Stories about Jesus are extraordinary claims and therefore require extraordinary evidence. Now, I'd like to bring the video to a more personal note. So forgive me for being presumptuous, but I'm willing to bet that these arguments for historicity of Jesus are superfluous to you. Because accepting the claim that Jesus lived does not necessarily mean that you believe in his divine nature. However, believing in Jesus' divine nature, according to the Bible, means that you necessarily believe that he lived. That's why I'm fairly certain that you've come to these particular arguments with entirely different reasons for believing in Jesus than the ones you present. Not just as a person, but as the prophesied Messiah. And I'm curious as to what those reasons are. So in order to spare us the headache of an unnecessary argument, I'll graciously grant that Jesus was an actual living person. So, here are some more pertinent questions that I hope you'll ask yourself critically, fearlessly, and honestly. What makes you believe that Jesus really performed the miracles that were attributed to him? And what distinguishes your belief from other people's belief in different messiahs, like Apollonius of Tyana or Zoroaster? You don't need to answer me, but I beg you to at least ask yourself, why do you believe? Lastly, the Atheist Experience is a live call-in public access show, so if you want your viewpoints to be addressed by the hosts directly, you should call in. Here's the website with their information.